Welcome back, everybody. I actually just remembered that I do have another movie review to do. But one thing, and I did want to say this about the last movie review. You know, apparently Wednesdays are a good day to go see a movie in the theater because I'll tell you something. Tony and I, it, it's the counting us. I think there was maybe like a grand total of like 20, maybe 30 people tops in that theater to see that other movie. But anyway, that aside, speaking of Tony, this involves the next movie review. Tony recently got HBO Max here at the house. So I have it on our TV down here in the living room. Well, I stumbled across the cartoon version of Batman, one of them. Okay? And it's, I ended up watching last night Batman by Gaslight, and it's a cartoon. It's a Batman cartoon. And you're not going to believe this, but Anthony Head is the voice of Pennyworth in this cartoon. I'm like, and it's what it is. It's Batman as if he lived during the late 1800s. During Jack the Ripper's time. And in fact, Jack the Ripper was involved in this cartoon movie. It was actually a movie. And my goofy butt, just for some reason, watched it all the way through. And it had Pamela Ivy, it's Poison Ivy, but it's like a belly dancer who gets murdered at the beginning of the movie. And then Selena Kyle, not as Catwoman, but like as a performer, like a circus performer or something. And then, it's just, I have to say it was very Victorian. It was set in, obviously, Victorian New York City. And it really did involve Jack the Ripper, or somebody who was the American Jack the Ripper. And it's just, like, I started watching it, like, it's Jack the Ripper. And I'm like, I'm going to think, good God, it's like, because, I happen to be, if you know me well enough in real life, you happen to know that I like Law and Order Special Victims Unit, and I'm, like, very fascinated by the true crime stuff. And I happen to be a Ripper fan. Well, sort of. I happen to like, I'm interested in that. The pictures don't gross me out anymore, because, believe me, after dealing with my husband's abscesses, not much grosses me out anymore. Yeah. You don't want to know, trust me. But anyway, back to this movie. It was actually very well done. I was surprised. It was just like one of those things where I was just like looking for something to watch on HBO, and I went like I got to the search option, and of course on Apple TV, you can actually speak to the remote and it'll type whatever you say onto the thing. Well, I just was like horsed around. I thought, well, let's see if HBO Max has Merlin on there. They don't, because Anthony Head was in a 5-season thing of the TV show Merlin. Back up until 2012, I think, or something like that. Sounds right. Well, anyway, I just wanted to see what all would pop up, that he was in. And this was one of them, because he played, as I said, Alfred Pennyworth. Well, it's actually pretty good. And I don't normally watch cartoons, but I do have to say, I would not recommend watching this Batman with little kids. Like I'd say, when I say little kids, I'm talking like folks under the age of, 12, 13, because they may have a little bit of trouble watching it. A 12, 13-year-old kid, most of them, are kind of aware of things at that point. But like like I said, I wouldn't watch it with anybody, younger, because like it's very gruesome, and like some of the stuff that they talk about is gruesome. I mean, and granted, a 12, 13-year-old kid might have a little bit of trouble with it, but if you talk to them about and explain what was going on and explain Jack the Ripper to them, who he was, like give them like what I call a thumbnail sketch of it, what this dude did, like I think they might be okay with it, and tell them, when you get older, when you're like 16, 17, 18 years old at least, we'll actually watch From Hell. Because From Hell is a little bit more like the blood and guts kind of thing. I mean, and mentioning From Hell, I have to kind of talk about that in relation to this movie. There's a scene where the doctor and his orderly both yak, after seeing what the Ripper did to one of his victims. That's how I feel about if you show your kids what the Ripper actually did in real life, they may have that reaction. Like, they may go yak, because it's like, bleh. I mean, it's kind of gruesome. And they didn't show what the Ripper did to Poison Ivy at the beginning. I mean, you just see, like, her ankles, and that's, like, her feet and ankles, and that's it. And then he, like, does something to the commissioner's wife, like half her face is messed up. I mean, that's, and then, like, they show him killing a nun, but, that's about, like, the extent of it. And none of that's got anything to do with the ending. The ending, you're like, okay. I won't ruin the ending so you can watch it, but, I mean, but I do have to say the ending, you're like, what? Yeah, that's one of my responses. I was like, the hell did I just watch? That was what I said. What the hell did I just watch here? I'm like, okay. I'm like, memo to self, that's not something I want to watch again. I mean, that is like, very rarely do I ever not want to see something at least 3, 4, 5 times. That was a kind of a one and done kind of thing. I mean, like, I've watched From Hell, like, probably 6 or 7 times, and it just does not bother me. My mom thinks I'm a crazy, sick person. I'm like, no. I'm like, because it's like, we know it happened, and B, whoever the perp is, whoever Jack the Ripper really was 200 years ago, or 100, almost 200 years ago, now, what are you going to do with him? He's dead, I mean, at this point, the dude is probably long dead. He's probably been long since dead for like a minute here. He's probably been dead for the last 150 years, maybe. I mean, but yeah, Jack the Ripper is Jack the Ripper, and it's just, I never thought they'd put like Jack the Ripper versus Batman in my life. I'm like, just as long as they don't try to do that with, like, say, Superman or Wonder Woman. Well, I wouldn't put him against Wonder Woman because he'd kill her. Or like the Flash or something. But yeah, and what is, and does come up in the movie, and this is something that I feel that it does need to get mentioned. They talk about the fact that, Jack the Ripper was left-handed. And there's a reason why I mention that. Up until the 20th century, any child that was thought, or ended up being left-handed, like the middle of the last century, any child that turned out left-handed would be forced to write with the right hand, because that was like the sign of the devil or something. Or, it was not a good thing. I mean, as a matter of fact, my late father would have been left-handed had my grandmother, his mom, not been totally backwards and made Dad learn to write with his right hand. And I'm serious, my dad would have been left-handed. A little known fact about him, but yeah. You know, it's like they talk about the fact that Jack the Ripper was left-handed. And it's got a lot to do with how, like, they figure out who did it. Um, I won't say who, I won't ruin the ending here, but I will say that's got something to do with it. You know, because back then in Victorian society, like I said, it was frowned on for you to be left-handed. It meant there was something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with being left-handed, because I'm left-handed myself. I speak from experience. I do. I speak from experience. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being left-handed. I mean, it's just, everything's just reversed of the way it would be for a right-handed person. Like, for example, my mother told me one time, I'd say 20 years ago, to go set the table. Because her and Dad were expecting, some company. Well, I did what she asked, Went there and set the table for a bunch of left-handed people. Mom went in and looked at the table and said, "What did you do?" I said, "I did what you told me to do, Mom." I set the table. And she's like, "Are all my acquaintances left-handed?" And I'm like, "No." I'm like, because I set it up for a left-handed person. It was the other way around. It was like knife, spoon, fork, 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 spoon, and it's like, they did teach me when I was a kid how to set the table. When I was in preschool, they did actually teach me how to do that, but even when I was a little kid, I set it up for a left-handed person. And they got mad. I remember the preschool teachers got mad at me for that. And I'm like, that's right. It's because it's just, like that. You're supposed to set up for a right-handed person. I'm like, yeah, well, guess what? Not all of us are right-handed. But I mean, seriously. And it's like they made a really big deal out of that whole left-handed thing in this movie. But anyway, like I said, I mean, it was one of those movies where you're like, okay, that's like totally random. I mean, like, I could see Batman more than, like I said, Superman or Wonder Woman or the Flash or the Arrow or Green Lantern dealing with this. Batman would have been more appropriate out of all of them. And like I said, I wouldn't have put Wonder Woman against Jack the Ripper, because Jack the Ripper in this movie had a thing out against women just in general. And that was like the problem. And it's set in New York during the 1800s, the late 1800s. So, anyway, I mean, it's like, I would watch it, but I wouldn't watch it with like your like little kids, like, like, say, 5th grade and younger, But like, you get your 6th grade kid, I mean, maybe, like middle school, like grade 6, 7, and 8, maybe. Your high school kid, yeah, because they're like older to where it's like, that stuff may not gross them out as much, but definitely not like your younger elementary school age kids. Well, anyway, I'm going to pause here, and y'all have a good evening, okay?